The Indiana Hoosiers are national champions. I still can't believe I'm saying those words. And in a world where a longtime doormat like Indiana can become national champs and go 16-0, makes you wonder what might be possible for the other losers in college football. Could someone else rise up? Could someone maybe from the SEC that is a longtime loser rise up? We will discuss on this edition of SEC Football Unfiltered, our podcast from the USA Today Network. I'm Blake Toppmeyer alongside John Adams. John, we've made it to the end of the road on another season. And did you think you would live long enough to see the day when Indiana would be national champions, not in basketball, but in football?
Man, I didn't think I'd live long enough to see Tennessee win a national championship, but it pulled that off in 1998. No, it's a shocker. I think of the great turnarounds in college football history. One always comes to mind: Kansas State, just a traditional doormat, decades and decades of mediocrity at best. And Bill Snyder turned it around, but Bill Snyder, he almost made a BCS national championship game, but he never won a title. Certainly never did what Indiana's done. And Curt Cignetti did it just like flipping a switch. That makes it even more dramatic. Is that this wasn't a long time coming? It wasn't a steady climb. It was boom. You're chumps. Now you're champs.
Yeah, and in trying to find things to compare it to, John, it's really just difficult. I mean, there's not much to compare it to, certainly in college football. But I think even as you go into other sports, it's pretty difficult to find comps. I was doing a radio appearance recently, John, and someone mentioned Florida basketball under Billy Donovan, winning 2 national championships in a 3-year span. Florida basketball, up to that point, had not had an illustrious history, but Billy Donovan turned things around, and next thing you know, the Gators were cutting down nets. And I thought that's an okay comparison, but I still don't think it's like Indiana football, because the Gators, although they didn't have necessarily a rich history in basketball, they had gone to a Final Four under Lon Kruger in the 90s, and they'd previously gone to a Final Four, I believe, under Donovan before they won those national championships, right? And so, like, it wasn't quite as bleak of a history as what Indiana football was. I mean, how bleak was Indiana football's history? I mean, they were one of the losingest programs in college football ever, and now they're hoisting the trophy. What do you think about that comp to Billy Donovan and Florida basketball?
No, that just doesn't compare. I mean, I was a columnist in Jacksonville in the '80s, mid '80s, and in Florida basketball, it wasn't an SEC doormat. It could make the NCAA tournament under Norm Sloan. It had some good players, not championship teams.
Right.
Billy Donovan did that. He accomplished that, but Florida's history was not, as bleak as what Indiana football was like. I just can't think of anything comparable. It's almost, if you want to find a comparison, you need to look at the future and see who could be next, which is kind of what you want to do in our podcast. But I just, otherwise, I mean, I think outside the SEC, I mean, Texas Tech has certainly made an upgrade, and it's a power player now in the NIL era with Cody Campbell's money. However, Texas Tech has had good teams. It had Mike Leach as its coach. I just can't think of, Kansas has been pretty bad in football, but it's had its moments of glory. I can't think of anything comparable.
Yeah, and a correction, John. I mentioned Donovan won 2 in a 3-year span. Of course, he went back to back with those national championships. But I agree with you. Like that is not a perfect comp. There is no perfect comp, because where Indiana started and then where it went, we just haven't seen anything like that. But you're right. That takes the conversation to, okay, let's stop trying to find comparisons from the past that never happened, and think where could this go next? And specifically, John, I want to take the conversation into the SEC, of course. And so I want to take a look at 5 programs in the SEC that don't have a history of national championships, and see which one of these schools, maybe, if any, or maybe there's 2 that you think could take inspiration from Indiana and go from being a doormat to being maybe even a national championship contender, because that's what this is, right? I mean, fans before Indiana could have hope. You could hope, but you to go from hope to belief, that required a dose of crazy if you were a fan of some sort of doormat. You could hope for 8-4, but to believe they were going to win the national championship, that required maybe an appointment with a head shrink. But now Indiana has turned hope into belief for schools. So the 5 SEC schools I'm thinking of, John: Kentucky, Vanderbilt, South Carolina, Mississippi State, and Arkansas. Now, Arkansas probably has the richest history of those 5, but we wanted to include them in this conversation because really all of Arkansas's glory days came prior to them being in the SEC, when they were in the old Southwest Conference. And so if you look at the structure of the conference now, the way it's been the last several seasons, I think those are sort of a good 5 group to consider: Kentucky, Vanderbilt, South Carolina, Mississippi State, and Arkansas. Vanderbilt has found relevance the last couple years under Diego Pavia, but we know its history. So of those 5, John, does anyone jump out to you and say, maybe they could be the next Indiana?
It's kind of hard to guess on this because I'm not sure who the big money person is with any kind of connection to these programs. I know, of course, Arkansas has Walmart and the Walton family. If it chose to make Arkansas a power in sports, I think it could have a shot, but it's been there a while and that hasn't happened. I wonder about Kentucky. It's got the horse racing industry. Could some Arab sheik move in and knock on Kentucky's door and say, you know what? I'd like to own a football program, college football team. And I'm kidding about the sheik, though it's not impossible in the world in which we live now. But I did notice Kentucky fired Mark Stoops, which I didn't think would happen because he had a $38 million buyout. It wasn't because he was doing well. I just didn't think Kentucky would pay a football coach that much to leave. And it did. Moreover, it hired Will Stein, a hotshot offensive coordinator at Oregon, and it really spent money in the transfer portal this month.
Mm-hmm.
So that tells me Kentucky has money to spend in football, and that's what it takes. And then there are comparisons to Indiana. Kentucky had a better football history than Indiana did. I mean, Kentucky actually hired Bear Bryant for a while. He didn't stick around. He said, I've got national titles to win, and you guys have Adolph Rupp, and you're all serious about basketball. Alabama doesn't care about that stuff. So he went to Alabama. But I just think those comparisons, I mean, they're right across the river from each other, both with this rich basketball history. And so Kentucky, I would think that some Kentucky people are thinking that very thing.
I agree with you, John. And Kentucky, you mentioned it. I mean, they had a front row view to this Indiana success. You know the way that state is structured, with Louisville right there on the Ohio River. I mean, you cross the bridge, you cross the Ohio River and get into southern Indiana. You have left Big Blue Nation and you're in Hoosier land now. Southern Indiana. It doesn't mean, of course, fans could spill on either side of the river, but once you cross the river and you're in southern Indiana, you're in the land of the Hoosiers. And Louisville, there's Cardinal fans in Louisville, sure, but Big Blue Nation, it spills into Louisville. And so if you're in Louisville, you had a front row seat to your neighbor winning a national championship. And I have to think you're wondering, why not us? Indiana, hey, it was a basketball school, like you said, with even less football history, if that's possible, than what Kentucky had. And in 2 short years, they turn it around. And I want to unpack something you said about the money, John, because I think this is key. You can't be cheap and win a national championship in today's landscape of NIL and the transfer portal. However, I think Indiana proved, and Curt Cignetti proved, you don't have to have Texas money to win a national championship. Indiana's roster was not the most expensive in college football. The spine of Indiana's roster was built with Curt Cignetti's former James Madison players. I mean, how much does it cost to raid the Sun Belt's wares? To pack those up and take them with you. I'm not saying that Indiana didn't invest in this roster. It did. What I am saying is I don't think you have to have the richest booster in all of college football to win a national championship. You have to invest. You're not going to win it by being a cheapo, but I don't think you have to spend like drunks in a casino. You have to make smart buys. You have to have a good coach. You have to have a good CEO. You have to know where maybe the talent is being underevaluated. As Cignetti says, he wants production over potential. He wasn't taking the cast-offs from the Blue Bloods who really hadn't found their way. They had a 4-star rating at a high school, but they hadn't hit at Alabama or Texas A&M or Florida. So come on into Indiana. No, that's not who he wanted. He wanted the guys who were his studs at JMU and other places like that he thought he could get, guys that were 2 stars or 3 stars or maybe the low-end 4 stars at a high school who'd proven in college they could play, and then he brokers a deal with them and brings them into Indiana. So I think that's important because I think when you see Mark Cuban on the sidelines, like people that maybe just tuned into Indiana the last 2 weeks of the season said, well, Mark Cuban just outspent everybody and Indiana bought this championship. No, Mark Cuban's a donor, but Indiana didn't outspend the richest of the rich. They're spending, but I think that provides even more hope and belief for a program like a Kentucky or like an Arkansas of you have to invest, but you don't have to outspend the Texas Longhorns or Cody Campbell down there in West Texas. You got to spend. You got to spend smartly, though.
Curt Cignetti's not a good coach. He's a great coach. I don't think I would get any arguments on that. I think it's easier to find a billionaire booster than it is to find a great football coach.
Mm-hmm.
I really do. I mean, there just aren't that many of them. They're good coaches, pretty good coaches, mediocre. But you look at coaches with great track records, and that's the best way to evaluate the future. Look at the track record, and you see where guys go, and then they, for whatever reason, they don't pan out. I mean, Brian Kelly comes to mind at LSU. I thought that was a good hire. I thought he would do well there, maybe win a national title. I thought Kalen DeBoer was a good hire for Alabama, and they still proved to be just that, but it's not going that way right now. I just think if you can get, ideally, you want both. You want both, and I think, but I do think you could find, if you've got enough money, you can just keep spending. You brought up the casino. If you just keep playing in the casino and you've got an unlimited supply of cash, eventually you can turn it around. And I think that can happen. A lot of, I don't know, obviously, what every school's financial situation is in terms of a connection to a billionaire, but I don't think Alabama has one.
Well, but I mean, I think your point is well taken, John, of yes, the ideal situation is you can just outspend everybody, and if you don't win it one year, then double down and spend even more the next year. But I think what can't get lost in this is that you have to have the richest war chest to win the whole thing. I think that is an important fallout of this championship is you have to be in the spending game. You got to be at the table, but I don't think you have to win every pot. You don't have to go out and buy all the richest players. And I think that's important if you are a school like Kentucky or Arkansas, because it can be daunting if you think, oh, to have a shot, we have to outspend Ohio State and Texas. I'm sorry, but that's probably not going to happen if you're Kentucky football. And I just don't know that you do have to outspend Ohio State and Texas. You got to be at the table, but you got to buy smart. And I wonder if we're seeing that. We'll see how smart it is once the next season rolls around. But I wonder if we're seeing that with Will Stein at Kentucky. As you mentioned, he's got a top 10 portal class, at least as it's ranked now by 24/7 Sports, and that includes Kenny Minchie, the former backup at Notre Dame, but he was a highly regarded backup. And we know under Mark Stoops at Kentucky, one of the longtime problems was Mark Stoops could never develop or find a quarterback. Well, now Will Stein, who was formerly the offensive coordinator at Oregon, he's got a good track record of developing quarterbacks. And if you wonder all of a sudden, maybe quarterbacks a little more interested in playing for Kentucky, we'll see what Kenny Minchie, the former Notre Dame backup, does this season with Will Stein. But I look at something like that and say, hey, they got a top 10 portal class here. It wasn't like Cignetti signed the number 1 portal class. He was getting good portal classes, but not the top ranked ones. And I'm just wondering, are we seeing something there with what Kentucky's got in this class? And Will Stein, someone who, as you said, it seems like the donors could get behind him. He's a Louisville native. He played for Louisville, but he says he grew up a Kentucky fan. Could be something here, John.
Well, I think our conclusion would be you got to have money. You got to spend. You got to get transfers to win in this era. So you have to have a certain level of wealth. But you also need a good coach. You need a good coach. And I think you need a good quarterback.
Yeah, those are 2 keys. And I know, we can talk about money. You got to have it. But I think you're spot on there. All the money in those oil fields doesn't change what you just hit there. You still have to have a coach, and you still have to have someone at the quarterback. If you don't have those 2 things, I don't care what the roster payroll is. I don't think you're going to win the whole thing. So you have to have those 2 things to have a choice. The old cliche still rings true. If you have a quarterback, you have a chance. And the thing left unsaid in that cliche is if you don't have a quarterback, you don't have much chance.
Well, we saw that. I mean, it's as though we got a beautiful blueprint, the perfect blueprint of winning a championship in this era. A player procurement, the way Cignetti went about it. Yes, Indiana's active in the portal. It got its quarterback from the portal, which I think is significant. Ohio State the year before won with a transfer portal quarterback. I think that's going to happen more often than not. Teams that go out and buy a quarterback in the portal could win your championship. So you need that, but talent evaluation figures into this, an organization. I think you talk about Cignetti's philosophy. It's not just going down a list. Okay, here's what 24/7 Sports Composite says are the top ranked players in the portal. And you're sitting there and you can't walk out your front yard without running into an oil well. And so you think, okay, well, let's just get that one, and let's just go down the list. We'll get top 85 guys in the portal. That'll be our roster. Get rid of these other bums and let's go win a championship. No, it won't work out. You've got to evaluate because those things aren't definite. You just don't know. But if you evaluate well and you've got to get guys that fit your system, what you're trying to do, and buy into all that. So again, it comes down to all those elements, and Indiana had them. And then we go back to a quarterback who's not just really good, but it was as though, gosh, I mean, he was sort of Tim Tebow like. That highlight run he made, he went Tim Tebow on those guys and just diving, running through tacklers, throwing his body up for grabs, all that stuff. It was just everything coming together, and to see all that, and even the fan base, the way Indiana took over first Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, and it didn't have the same overwhelming advantage fan wise in Miami on the Hurricanes backyard, but it still was probably had the majority.
Oh, so, yeah. Being there, John, it was 60-40 easily. It may have been 65-35 in Miami's home stadium. It was impressive, which makes me wonder. We can talk about billionaires, sure. If the playbook to winning a national championship probably ought to include cozying up to the billionaire you can find with a degree from your school, the school you're coaching at, and saying, "Hey, would you like sideline passes to all our games this season?" Okay, stroke a check. So of course you want to cozy up to the billionaires. That's just part of it. But I'm also struck by the fact, and you've probably seen this fact quoted throughout Indiana's run, John. Indiana says they have the largest living alumni base in the country. And I wonder about that. Like, yes, it's great if a billionaire can fund your whole roster, but the other way to go about this is getting checks from alumni, smaller boosters far and wide. Now, that won't add up as quickly as what a billionaire could do, but I don't think it's insignificant, John, that Indiana is the team with this uprising, and they have the country's largest living alumni base. And I'm wondering how much of a concern that should be for the SEC, because with the exception of some schools like Texas A&M, a few others, a lot of SEC schools don't have the alumni base that a lot of Big Ten schools have. If you pull up a list of schools with the largest living alumni bases, you're looking at schools like Indiana, Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State's up there. Even schools like UCLA and Cal. And you think, well, what's Cal Berkeley going to do in football? Well, what did anybody think Indiana was going to do? You inspire those alumni, and you might be surprised what they could do. Would that concern you at all if you're a school like a Kentucky or a Mississippi State or an Arkansas, and you're trying to kind of mimic and hope and believe that you can do this Indiana uprising, and then you look and think, boy, they got 2 or 3 or 4 times as many alumni as what we have. Could we really pull this off?
I still think it comes down to dollar signs. It doesn't matter if you get contributions from a lot of fans or a gigantic contribution from one fan or a combination thereof.
Mm-hmm.
If you bring out a lot of millionaires,
don't
have the billionaires, but you got an army of millionaires, you can do it too. So I don't think, I'm not dismissing that. That could be an advantage for Indiana, but I still think it's just how much you can get. It doesn't matter how you get it. Just you've got to get a certain amount of money. And so I think those Indiana fans now will be more encouraged than ever because they just experienced this. They just experienced one of the greatest college football seasons in history. Who else has gone 16-0? Had the Heisman
1894 Yale, John.
Okay. Well,
you cover that team, right?
No, I didn't. I saw it play, but I didn't cover.
Okay.
So no, you're right. I mean, it's just it was just an unbelievable experience. So think how much fun you're talking about creating memories. Think how many fans that didn't experience that in Miami, and we're debating whether or not they could go, if they could afford it, whether they could get tickets, logistics, get away from work, all that stuff. They thought, man, if we ever have a team like this again, I'm going to the games. I just think this will encourage more interest and consequently more donations. I mean, they're not going to want this to be a one-time thing. They see what they can do. That they didn't get this kind of attention winning a national championship in basketball.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's it. Like, just because maybe you're good in basketball or good in women's basketball or baseball, don't you want to have success in other sports too? And getting back to the billionaire, all it takes is that one billionaire who says, yeah, I like being good in basketball, but what I really would like is to see our football program be good. Coach, how would $20 million do to get you started on this roster? You might have to fund the rest by passing the hat, but I'll get you started, right? So the long and short of it is you found a new reason to hope and believe and maybe knock on a billionaire's door if you're Kentucky or Arkansas or South Carolina or Mississippi State or on down the line. But I'm wondering, John, before we get into a coaching question I want to ask you about, but before we go there, I'm wondering, in a world in which Indiana can go 16-0 and win a national championship. And we're saying that schools that maybe didn't have a chance before have more of a chance now. And we're mentioning, oh, hey, that could be good for Kentucky. But overall, isn't that kind of bad for the SEC? It's good for Kentucky. But on the whole, isn't it bad that Indiana can win a national championship now? Or insert your other school here that doesn't have a rich football history? Because if we're basing this on rich histories and blue bloods and places where college football reigns supreme, I would think that's great for the SEC. That's what you want. But in this nouveau riche world, I don't know if that's so good for the SEC on the whole.
No, because tradition kind of got trampled, just as Alabama got trampled on the field there by Indiana. I mean, that was, to me, was a watershed moment for SEC football to see its marquee program not just lose, but just get totally overwhelmed by Indiana, and not getting overwhelmed by Oklahoma or Southern Cal or some storied program, but Indiana, this newbie. So yeah, I think that is alarming. And Cody Campbell of Texas Tech, the billionaire, said he doesn't think Alabama can keep up now. I think that's alarming. You combine the two, and so you're looking at SEC programs. You look at Georgia, Alabama, but Alabama's, it's the new SEC programs. When I look at the SEC now, I think of Texas and Texas A&M as having the best opportunities to win championships, and LSU, because they have, to me, from what I've observed, they have the most money. And I think that not traditional success makes them favorites in this brave new college football world.
John, we know college football is a bit of a copycat sport on down to the hiring. And now that Curt Cignetti has a national championship legitimizing him as one of the top coaches in the sport, you just wonder how many other programs can or will try to mimic such a hire. And I reflect back on the SEC's hiring cycle in which 6 head coaches were hired. And I look at the hires. Lane Kiffin is sort of the outlier. He was the hottest name in the coaching carousel. LSU got its target, and that was that. But you look at the other hires, and some might say, "Oh, that's Cignetti inspired," in the fact that SEC schools, Arkansas, Auburn, and Florida, all hired Group of 5 coaches, and that's where Cignetti came from. He was at James Madison, the Group of 5. But I don't actually think the SEC did take inspiration from the Cignetti hire in this cycle, because when you think about it, Curt Cignetti was a career winner. He wasn't some Group of 5 coach who just flew in on the scene and was still a young buck, and everybody was still being introduced to this guy. No, he'd been around the block. He'd worked on Nick Saban's staff. His dad was a coach. He'd won at every level he'd coached at. He was at the Division II level. He was at the FCS level as a head coach, worked his way up and through the ranks, and he won a national championship at 64 years old. Remember when Nick Saban retired and Harbaugh left for the NFL, we were seeing all those headlines of, oh, college football is a young man's game now. You got to have the young coach, and then the old guys don't want to do this anymore. Well, a 64-year-old just won a national championship. And I'm looking at the hires in the SEC this past cycle. Put Kiffin aside. But all the other hires, these are guys in their 30s or early 40s, ranging up to Ryan Silverfield at Arkansas is 45 years old. Other than Kiffin, none of the hires are older than 45. None of them have the track record that Curt Cignetti had, granted at lower levels, Division II and FCS. I wonder if maybe there was an opportunity missed here in this SEC hiring cycle to go out and get someone like a Curt Cignetti, a career winner who maybe hasn't done it at this level, but they've done it at a lot of levels and they've proven themselves. Instead, Auburn hires Alex Golish from South Florida. He's been there a few years. Florida hires John Sumrall from Tulane, been there a couple years. Nobody really did the Cignetti move of hiring the elder statesman, if you will, and bringing him up to the big time. You surprised by that?
I'm not surprised by it. I think SEC schools, again, getting back to tradition, getting back to their enormous fan support, and how those fans, how passionate they are, and how much they scrutinize their programs. You, I think schools try to win the press conference, and they try to present them with a new coach who's they can point to this and that and say, "See, here's the guy."
And do you think it's easier to do that with the 40-year-old hot shot than the 60-year-old?
Yeah. Yes,
okay.
I do. Yes, I do. And so imagine the outcry if Alabama would have hired Curt Cignetti from James Madison as its head
my
coach.
Goodness.
Oh my gosh, they would have stormed the gates. You just couldn't do it. What if Kirby Smart suddenly retired at Georgia, and you brought in the James Madison 60-year-old coach from James Madison? Who's going to buy that? Now, I think you have a better chance of doing that off the beaten path, out of mainstream, the powers that be.
Like in Indiana, taking a chance.
In Indiana, way off the beaten path in football. I just think you don't have to answer so much to fan base. When I go back and you look at Miami had a long string of hiring good coaches. When in the early 80s, Miami finally won a national title in 1984, but Howard Snellenberger started the ball rolling. He's the one that laid the foundation for the dynasty. Others capitalized on it, like Jimmy Johnson, Dennis Erickson. But he's the one that started it. And I think he went there from Virginia Tech. But the AD at Miami, and he talked about this, he didn't have this huge fanatical fan base following that he had to appease. He just goes out and gets who he thinks might be the best coach, who he thinks would work here. So he doesn't have to answer to a lot of people, and that's what started it there. So I think that can be a plus. The other thing, though, but I just don't know I think the SEC did what so many schools do in its hiring this year. Somebody that had immediate success. You see it in basketball all the time. Some mid-major team reaches the Sweet 16 unexpectedly in the NCAA basketball tournament. Next thing you know, its coaches off to a Power Four conference team. I think that's kind of what you saw with these hiring. Well, I don't know, but this guy won this much at that level. Let's move him up one notch and see how he does.
Well, you're right. It was like everybody wanted Kiffin, and if you couldn't get Kiffin, let's go get the hot shot in the American Conference, because the American Conference is the conference that's closest to the Power Four. So let's go do that. I think you're right, and I think you're also right that it's probably easier if you can't get the Lane Kiffin types to then try to convince your fan base at the press conference, hey, we got the up-and-coming hot shot, right? But I don't know. I mean, I just think like if you're Auburn, and maybe it'll work for Auburn with Alex Golesh. He did a great job as Tennessee's offensive coordinator, did a fine job at South Florida. I'm just using him sort of as a placeholder in this argument. You could put John Sumrall in there at Florida too, or Ryan Silverfield at Arkansas. I'm just wondering if one of those schools, would they have been better served, John, by hiring someone like Willie Fritz? Willie Fritz is 1 year older than Curt Cignetti. He's 65. Okay, he's the Houston coach, as you know. But if you look at Willie Fritz's track record, I mean, this guy is proven. In the 90s, he was coaching a junior college team to 12-0 seasons, back-to-back 12-0 seasons. In 2 years in junior college ranks, Willie Fritz in the 90s went 24-0 in a 2-year span. Then he goes on to Central Missouri, the Division II ranks, won at a pretty high level there. Then he goes to Sam Houston State and Georgia Southern. He's winning in the FCS, coaching in national championships there. Then he goes to Tulane. He was the guy before the guy, right? I mean, he was the one that got this rolling for John Sumrall at Tulane. Summerall came in on his heels. And it's like, yeah, if you introduce Willie Fritz at the press conference, this 65-year-old who's a career winner, but are you going to win the press conference? Maybe not. But I'm thinking if you're taking inspiration from Cignetti, that's who you're hiring. Someone like that, not the guy who's been in an American Conference school for 3 years and done a good job there. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, you make a really good point there when you talk about Summerall. He followed in Willie Fritz's footsteps at Tulane. Willie Fritz is the one who ushered the turnaround, not Summerall. See, that concerns me a little bit about Summerall. It's as though they got the guy that just kept things going, and not for long. We don't know how long he might have sustained it, but not for long. But don't you kind of want the guy that built the house, not the guy that maintained it? But that his name didn't. I don't remember hearing it with
No,
any
I
of
mean
these
there was really
jobs.
no buzz around Willie Fritz in the coaching carousel. Maybe that's because he said I'm retiring at Houston and going nowhere.
Well,
I don't know. I guess that's possible. Or, but I don't know. I mean, Kyle Whittingham probably would have said that at Utah too, and then they said,
sure.
no,
Well,
we don't think you are going to retire here, Kyle Whittingham. And he said, fine, I'll be Michigan's coach. But there's another example outside the SEC. Michigan had some unique circumstances, but they hired the career winner, the veteran. And that doesn't mean I think Kyle Whittingham is going to win a national championship at Michigan. What I do think, though, is that we got to start rethinking some of these hires. And as I said, just a couple years ago, Saban retires. And so everybody thinks, okay, well, the old guys have had enough of this thing. No, Saban had enough of this thing. Cignetti thinks it's pretty darn good. He's having fun, or at least his version of fun. He's winning national championships, which I think he enjoys. Got one now. Doesn't mean that if you're in your 60s, you can't do it anymore. You got to find the right guy. But I think you could still make an older hire.
Well, see, you could have hired a lot of people to share your podcast with you.
Yeah, there we go.
Much younger guys.
I didn't want the young hotshot.
No, you got the old guy, 77-year-old sports columnist. Who would thought that would work out?
It's worked for us 5 years running, John. This was our fifth season, which brings us to a good point. We want to thank our listeners who've been with us for 5 years, or even if you just found us this year. We're glad you found us. We're glad you stuck with us throughout the season. We're going to be here each and every week throughout the off season. But if you haven't already, we'd appreciate it if you take a moment, whatever app you're listening on, if you have the opportunity, subscribe to the pod so you get each and every episode. You won't miss an episode throughout the off season. As I said, we're going to stick with you throughout the off season. John and I will be here. And if you get a chance, take a moment to give us a rating or review. Those ratings and reviews help us get in front of more listeners. John, on our way out the door, much, much more to discuss in the weeks to come. Transfer portal, too early rankings, all that stuff. We'll get to that on future episodes. I want to kind of put a bow on the season. How will you remember 2025 in college football?
I think when you say that, two things pop into my head. I'm just talking about a memory.
Mm-hmm.
When I think of this season, I'm not talking. I mean, sorry, Indiana is the dominant story in just every way. But when I think back, one is going to be Fernando Mendoza, who's described as an awkward runner. Oh yeah, he looked really awkward running through the Hurricane defense on the way to the end zone. And he went kind of John Elway like in the Super Bowl when he launched his body after already going Tim Tebow on one Miami defender and just charges into the end zone. And running isn't even his main talent. That's one thing I will think of. Another thing, far removed from a championship game, was halftime of the Texas A&M South Carolina game.
No, yes.
When Shane Beamer walked through the portal, what was the score? It was something like 30 to
It was a
3 or
lot to
31
little.
to 3. Something, it just, the game was over. I mean, everybody thought the game, it was a incredulous upset, and Shane Beamer was shaking his fist like, uh-huh. Yep.
Uh-huh.
And he even did he even did an interview at half in which he said, like, well, I'm not surprised by this. We beat these guys before. I mean, no, this is nothing strange going on here.
Well, inspired by that, John, I'll give a couple moments.
Okay.
One on the sort of the end of the spectrum, maybe Mendoza, like one of the real storylines of the season, and the other taking inspiration from your Shane Beamer moment there. For me, I'll remember it, of course, for the Hoosiers, but beyond that, Lane Kiffin, all the drama surrounding that. Will he stay? Will he go? Ultimately, he leaves a playoff team to take the LSU job. Ole Miss fans are giving him the middle finger salute as he leaves at the airport. Lane Kiffin's telling stories, some of which only he believes, some of which probably only happened in his mind to justify why he leaves for LSU. And we had that preseason documentary. Remember that, John? ESPN, their documentary of the many lives of Lane Kiffin and how he's this new man or whatever. It's like, Lane is still Lane, the heartbreaker in chief. So that is one thing I will remember this season for. And then number two, Vanderbilt's punter in a bowl game, running past the line of scrimmage and then punting it. Who says bowl games aren't fun anymore, John? That was one of my favorite plays in the entire season. Vanderbilt's punter takes the snap, takes off running. You think it's a fake? No. He just wanted to get some yards under him before he punted it. Well, come to find out, if you punt it past the line of scrimmage, I didn't know this because you never see it happen. You never see a punter take off running 15 yards and then punt it. If you do that, dead play, the opponent gets the ball right there. And so Iowa took possession and scored a touchdown. Vanderbilt lost that game. I love plays like that, John. All these great moments. Oh, yeah, those are fantastic. That Mendoza run, everybody will remember that. I'll remember Vanderbilt's punter in a bowl game, taking off, running past the line of scrimmage, and then deciding to punt it.
I'd never seen that happen before either. I'm glad you brought that up. And when he did it, because I wasn't aware of what the penalty would be.
Neither was I.
It was a huge penalty. And I thought, you know what I thought at the time too, how appropriate that it would happen against Iowa, which you think of Iowa as kind of, Iowa's just kind of at this level. It makes a bowl game under Curt Ferentz. It wins 7 or 8 games. It doesn't win championships, but it's all the things. It's solid. You can count on Iowa being so good. It's not going to dazzle anybody, but it's going to make fewer mistakes than most teams. And here was Iowa capitalizing on this runaway punter for Vanderbilt.
All right. We'll leave it there. Much more to discuss this offseason. We'll do that in the weeks to come. Thanks for listening to this edition of SEC Football Unfiltered.